So anyways, Akiyuki's taken aboard the Zamboni, and he's forced to do chores and sort mail to keep his mind sharp and to prevent him from turning to stone while he figures out how to control his Xam'd powers. However, the gem embedded in his forearm winds up attracting flying human forms which attack the Zamboni. We also get a better look at the foul-mouthed, raven-haired beauty of a captain. However, as she puts it,
Sweet raven-haired beauty with glasses, huh? It's all just a camouflage.
this is Ishu Benikawa. She's a bit of a paper tiger, though she proves time and again that she knows her way around her weapons and is an expert marksman. Despite her constant swearing and rough exterior, she plays a motherly role for Nakayami, and it turns out that Nakayami isn't really her name at all. It's just that when she was young, Ishu used to yell "no more tears" at her, and because it sounds that way in Japanese, the crew nicknamed her that because of Ishu's constant yelling. Akiyuki also tries to mail a letter to Haru, however he forgets to give it to the collection truck as they're pulling away. He then enlists the help of Akushiba, who has been putting Akiyuki down and putting him through the ringer, making him feel like he doesn't belong because he's new to the crew. Under threat of having his Nakayami pinup exposed, and having his pride as the fastest mail delivery man called into question, he winds up running all night to deliver Akiyuki's letter. Their relationship seems to relax a bit after this. Unfortunately, this is one of the only times we really get to see Akushiba develop as a character, and I wish he played more of a role in the plot, because I think cocky wise guys can be fun characters. Meanwhile, Haru and Furuichi enlist in the military. Haru knows that Akiyuki's alive, but his parents and Furuichi seem to doubt her and believe that she's in some form of denial. Furuichi, on the other hand, is enlisting not only to avenge Akiyuki, but also to prove to himself that he was the stronger of the two. Throughout all of this, we wind up catching glimpses of the mysterious Commander Kakisu, and he seems to be a cold-hearted military officer with a very ends justify the means type of attitude. He'll serve as the primary antagonist for like the first 3/4 of the anime, and his goal is to capture one of the Zams, learn how to turn their powers into a weapon against the northern government, and this means that he's targeting Akiyuki. And since Haru and Furuichi are now members of the military, he's also willing to abuse and exploit them for information as well. Kakisu is also working together with a scientist who's experimenting on human form weapons and trying to make his own anti-Xam'd weapon of his own, but he winds up turning one of Akiyuki's classmates into a rogue human form weapon which rampages through the city. Kakisu's quick to cover this up with propaganda, though, and claims that it was a northern attack that was the reason that the city got destroyed. Nearly a quarter of the way through the anime, we meet the mysterious Ryo. He's a disheveled-looking man who later shaves off his beard to reveal that he's actually a devilishly handsome photographer. He was the previous Xam'd who was saved by Nakayami, and he's been name-dropped a few times by Akushiba and Kaselji, the mechanic. Ryo Haru's reputation with the crew of the Zambani causes Akiyuki to doubt himself once more, feeling overshadowed by the previous Xam'd and favored crew member. However, Ragyo seems to be on his own quest to understand and coexist with his Xam'd powers. Once Akiyuki realizes he has his own path to walk, only then is he able to stop living in the shadow of others' success. It's sort of like he was never in their shadow at all, actually. He just kept holding himself to other people's standards instead of his own. Nakayami, sensing the coming revival of the northern government's cultish ruler, the Hirukin Emperor, insists on returning to her hometown of Tesset. Her and Ishu have a very touching moment atop a cliff, where Ishu reveals that despite all of her cursing, she never really thought of Nakayami as a burden, and tells her if the world gets too tough, she can always come back to the Zambani, as well as telling her that even if she doesn't show it, she's actually going all to pieces on the inside and needs Nakayami to tell her not to cry. This moment was extremely moving, and it touched me deeply. Very deeply. Akiyuki and Nakayami return to Sentan Island, where they're confronted by Haru and Furuichi. Now, seeing his friend alive again, it unleashes the seething jealousy that was within Furuichi, and he reveals that he had also been embedded with a gem in his leg on that fateful day of the bus explosion. And he's been harboring feelings of resentment towards Akiyuki since childhood. Nakayami says Furuichi's rage has been keeping him from turning to stone. However, he then reveals his Xam'd form, and it's just as monstrous as the feelings and emotions that created it. As it continuously changes forms and morphs in a manner that's both fascinating to behold, as well as terrifying. Furuichi wants to be the one to protect Haru, and it's obvious that he has feelings for her, as he says they can run away together. But Haru reveals that she loved Akiyuki all along. This marks a turning point for Akiyuki, as Furuichi is now a mirror of Akiyuki's former selfish self, and the way that he felt towards Ragyo, as well as others towards the beginning of the series. However, now Akiyuki is free and in control of his own emotions. That being said though, seeing Haru in danger leaves no question in his mind what must be done. And much like his first Xam'd battle, he turns into a Xam'd, launching himself at Furuichi without hesitation, and brutally beats him into submission. I absolutely love the way that Akiyuki's Xam'd form moves and is animated during these fight scenes, and the Japanese voice actor for Furuichi really drives home the emotion in his voice when begging Akiyuki for validation and mercy. After the fight, Nakayami's able to return Furuichi to his original form, but then the military shows up, and they want to capture both of the Xam's. Furuichi gets Commander Kakisu's word that Haru won't get in trouble for him hiding his Xam'd abilities. Though Kakisu's a double-crossing snake, and you can already tell that he's lying and going to double-cross him. Meanwhile, Akiyuki plays dead, so Nakayami has time to escape, and then he takes Kakisu hostage to serve as a distraction. Kakisu orders his men to capture the Xam'd, even if it costs him his life. However, when his men refuse to shoot because they might hit him, he says he shouldn't have used rookies. This shows Kakisu's disdain that he feels for people he considers beneath him. Akiyuki flees with Kakisu in hand, and once they're alone, Kakisu reveals that his father, Akiyuki's father, wound up saving him during the war, and he promises to make a place where Akiyuki can be safe with his friends. However, Akiyuki senses that this is a double cross and he winds up fleeing. And as soon as Akiyuki releases Kakisu, he unloads his entire magazine, proving why Akiyuki was right not to trust him in the first place. Nakayami continues her journey home alone, but along the way she meets a young boy who also gains Xam'd powers named Yango. Yango's been using his Xam'd powers to steal food and pretty much be a street urchin since the explosion that killed his parents and turned him into a Xam'd. Nakayami tells him not to use his Xam'd powers carelessly, or he could turn to stone, and that Yango's been very lucky that he hasn't up till this point. Yango gets into trouble with some of the people he'd stolen from, and he gets beaten up, but Nakayami offers to trade her beat kayak for Yango's life, forcing her to continue her journey on foot. Nakayami and Yango wind up making their way to Tessic Village, and they meet Nakayami's sister Kujireka there. The people of Tessic praise Kujireka for restoring order to their village and coordinating pretty much every aspect of their lives, leading to prosperity. However, Kujireka's been using the blood of the Tessican people to create a gem that allows her to turn herself into a Xam'd. She's even been embedding 3 gems from actual Xam'ds into her chest in order to strengthen herself so that she could fight against the Hirukan Emperor and the Northern government to take revenge for the way her people have been treated. Nakayami and Kujireka spend a good deal of time talking about the Holy Land of their people, the Quickening Chamber, which is a sort of sealed-off holy site that will open itself soon, and Kujireka desires to retake it through violence to prevent the Hirukan Emperor from using it to sacrifice the Tessican people's souls in order to become more powerful. Yango, meanwhile, realizes that even though he's surrounded by his own people, he doesn't feel like he fits in with how everyone there blindly follows Kujireka. And at the same time, Akiyuki's father is helping Haru escape from Sentan Island to chase after Akiyuki as she's made up her mind to stop following others by using the military to look for Akiyuki, and instead venture on her own 2 feet and follow her own path. While all of this was happening, Akiyuki's gotten amnesia after his fight with Furuichi, unable to remove his Xam'd mask until he remembers his identity, and in a stupefied state, he winds up being sold into slavery. Thankfully, he's bought to serve as a manservant for a kindly older woman, who happens to be Sumako Kakisu. If that name sounds familiar, she's the mother of the Twisted Commander, and he wishes he could forget about her. While all of that's going on, Akiyuki's father confronts Commander Kakisu himself. They reminisce about the war, however, Kakisu has a severe case of survivor's guilt, and he winds up blaming Akiyuki's father for saving him instead of finishing him off back then. Their conversation turns hostile, though, as they foment the values of life, death, and honor. Kakisu winds up slashing Akiyuki's father in the eye, however, Akiyuki's dad shoots Kakisu right in the head, telling him that he should stop pretending to be an evil commander and live as the boy that he saved during the war. As he lays on the ground bleeding, Kakisu's mind drifts to memories of his mother, showing that he regrets how he treated her by running away from his past. Meanwhile, the Zamboni has become stranded, and during the repairs, Ishu and Ragyo wind up joining a group of rebels trying to overthrow the Hirukan Emperor. They infiltrate the Diamond Tower, an imposing building that is heavily guarded with an eye shape on the top. And as the two make their way in, fighting off guards and human forms every step of the way, Ragyo winds up getting shot and is crushed when a ceiling collapses, but not before urging Ishu to take out the Hirukan Emperor herself. Ishu laments the loss of Ragyo and her former lover Rado, both of whom died trying to destroy the Emperor's slumbering body. Finally, Ishu blows up the Emperor's chamber. However, this does not kill the Emperor and merely stirs him from his slumber. Sometime while all that was happening, Akiyuki remembers his identity and recalls his original mission. Leaving the retirement village and Sumako behind, Akiyuki, Haru, Nakayami, Yango, and the Hirukan Emperor, as well as the up-till-now fabled Lady Sonova, all start to converge on the quickening chamber, with Akiyuki and Haru meeting there first and reuniting for the first time since their fight with Kuruichi. Upon entering the quickening chamber, they find hundreds of cult-like Tessican worshippers, ready to lay down their lives as a sacrifice to the Hirukan Emperor. By this point, Akiyuki's experiences have allowed him to fully appreciate life and his sense of individuality and self. So the idea that people would willingly throw those things away makes him rightfully upset. Enraged by the idea of people willing to throw their lives away as well as their spirits to sate some Hirukan Emperor's hunger, Akiyuki leaves the quickening chamber in a huff, taking Haru with him. They prepare to leave, but suddenly the city's attacked by the Southern Army that had been stationed at Sentan Island. As the city is in chaos, the Hirukan Emperor arrives, and Akiyuki turns into a Xam'd, determined to stop the Hirukan Emperor at any cost. At the same time, Nakayami finally meets with Lady Sonova, the two discussing the fate of the people inside the quickening chamber and ultimately the fate of the world to come after the fateful battle here. Lady Sonova tells Nakayami the tale of how the people of her family's lineage had been the caretakers of the imperial line for centuries, and indeed the current emperor was her own son. However, the child was stillborn, yet the northern government needed a leader, and thus they used the gems that turn people into Xam'ds, only this time they desperately brought the dead child emperor back from the grave. Lady Sonova was never allowed to see her child. As he was never given life, he never formed any sense of self, and existed more as a figurehead than an actual ruler. But due to his hollow, meaningless existence, he tried to fill it with the souls of those he devoured in the ritual at the quickening chamber. While all that was going on, Akiyuki was battling the Harukan Emperor, who reveals he does not know who he is, and claims to be the shadow in the darkness that has followed Akiyuki, having even taken a form that assisted Akiyuki back when he was at the retirement village. To help him remember his true sense of self, the Harukan Emperor then dares Akiyuki to give him a more fitting title than Darkness. Very edgy. Kuji Reika attempts to attack the Emperor in some form of revenge for the mistreatment of her people. However, the Emperor easily deals with her, stabbing her through the shoulder and saying her feelings of revenge and resentment are far too feeble to stand against the emptiness he feels. Akiyuki breaks from the fight to rescue Kuji Reika as she plummets back to the surface, placing her under a bridge and bandaging her shoulder before divulging a lesson he learned from Nakayami, that being that indulging your hatred will never bring you happiness. Kuji Reika's overwhelmed with tears as she realizes the depths of her sister's love not only for herself, but others as well. And Akiyuki goes to re-engage the Emperor for one final fight. Meanwhile, Lady Sonova begins the ritual of purification, warping herself and Nakayami back to the moment they first met. Lady Sonova reveals that she's been creating Xam'd intentionally so one could find the power to respond to her stillborn son's life of emptiness. Nakayami's distraught by the number of people killed by turning to stone when they failed to become Xam'ds. However, Lady Sonova says it will all come to an end when she fuses with the largest gem, known as the Mother Kiriko, and she'll destroy both the quickening chamber and her son. However, Nakayami says that the resulting explosion would simply create even more Xam'd, and more people would wind up turned to stone. She snivels at the thought of people having to die, pleading to be allowed to live with them here and now, together. Seems like Akiyuki's desire to live with others had rubbed off on Nakayami as well in some way. Lady Sonova fuses with the Mother Kiriko, and Nakayami takes her to return to the quickening chamber, where she announces that she's closing it for 1,000 years, so that no further sacrifices can be made, and so that the world can have its fill of happiness. Yango also happens to be there, and begs Nakayami not to go, but she urges him to get everyone out of the quickening chamber instead. Meanwhile, Akiyuki is still fighting the Harukan Emperor, who says that he has always been Akiyuki's shadow. Akiyuki says, "You really have always been there for me." He explains to the stillborn Emperor that there's no way he can give him life, so instead, he offers his own name to answer the Harukan Emperor's original request for an identity. The Harukan Emperor tells Akiyuki he will forget himself once more and lose his own identity if he gives up his name. But Akiyuki seems to have come to terms with this already and willingly offers his sense of self to his foe, finally defeating him. The quickening chamber fires a beam of light into the air, and clearly someone had just seen that turning a circle inside out video, because the energy beam does that exact same thing. The people who had been turned to stone begin to turn back, and they're granted mercy and a second chance at life by Nakayami's sacrifice. However, Yango's not satisfied with this outcome, and he tries to opening the quickening chamber, before it closes completely. Wishing only to be with Nakayami once more, Akiyuki falls from the sky and lands beside him, the Xam'd mask now covering his face as it had when he first lost his memory. Nyongo's a bit freaked out by this at first, but then begs for his help. Nyongo's words stir something in Akiyuki, and he unleashes his Xam'd powers once more, but nothing could stop the quickening chamber from sealing. Having exhausted himself completely, and having forgotten his sense of self, Akiyuki turns to stone, and Nyongo's left to cry, alone. At this moment, after all the fighting, the Zamboni finally shows up, as they had just finished rescuing Ishu from the Diamond Tower, and they decide to take the fossilized Akiyuki back to Sentan Island where he belongs. Everyone's left to reflect on the events that had transpired. There was now time to mourn their lost friends, and they finally got a chance to lick their wounds, which time always seems to find a way to heal. 9 years pass, and Haru becomes a substitute teacher back on Sentan Island. One of her students asks whether she has a boyfriend or not. Typical teenager behavior. She sees visions of herself and her friends from before the events of the anime and the students she teaches now. And at the end of the day, she climbs the hill to where the statuified Akiyuki's been placed. However, she winds up meeting Akiyuki there, and he lets her know that he loves her. Unfortunately, the anime doesn't explain if he's physically there or is just an apparition of Haru's mind. Maybe he's there spiritually or in a metaphorical sense, but at the very least, they can finally be together happily in the end, whichever way it has to happen. I've heard rumors that the ending of this anime got rushed, so that could explain the open-ended nature of the ending. But I like it anyways, regardless of whether it was the intended outcome or not. It could also explain the sudden introduction and revolving nature of the plot regarding the quickening chamber towards the end. I feel like its importance would have been more fleshed out if there had been more episodes. In case you can't tell, I cried a lot while making this review, so I hope you all appreciate the effort that went into making this video. This anime taught me a lot about accepting yourself and accepting others, despite the differences, and it impacted my development as a teenager immensely. You could say I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't seen such great stories on the caliber of the ones told in Xam'd, as well as some of my other favorite animes. You'll find that a lot of the animes that I love and cherish are the ones where the hero's able to forgive a cruel world and step forward into a brighter future. And I am very happy to have Xam'd among my list of positive endings. As Akiyuki matured throughout this show, I was able to mature as well, and hopefully you watch this anime, enjoy it, and maybe grow a little for the better for having seen it. That's all I have time for this week, guys. Ciao for now, and Hexi out. Thanks go out to my Patreon supporters. Your donations mean the world to me, and I thank you for supporting my future endeavors.